Let me tell you something about food. Not the kind you eat just to fill your belly, anybody can make that. I mean the kind that talks to your soul before it ever reaches your mouth. The kind where the smell alone pulls a chair out for you before you've been invited. The kind that, when your mother sets it on the table, the whole room goes quiet, like a church that has just remembered God. That is the food people talk about. That is the food that earns a woman a name. In Idoro village, certain women had reputations built entirely on what came out of their pots. Mama Ngozi's egusi soup was so thick and fragrant that people swore her late husband married her on the strength of a single bowl, and nobody argued the point. Mariel, down the road, made omelette so smooth it was said she must have struck a private deal with the yam itself. Even Baba Chaik's wife, who could not be trusted to boil water unsupervised, had one dish, just one, that she had perfected, a pepper soup so good it had bought her 20 years of respectful silence from neighbors who otherwise had plenty to say. In that village, your cooking was your reputation. Your cooking was your character. Your cooking, in every way that mattered, was your CV. And then there was Bisi. Before the drama, and trust me, the drama is coming, let me be fair to this girl, because she deserves honesty more than she deserves ridicule. Bisi was not lazy. She was not careless. If anything, she was the opposite of lazy, which, as you'll see, was part of the problem. She was 12, the second child of Baba Ade and Mama Ade. Yes, the whole village had called them that since their first child was born, and nobody had used their proper names since. Her older brother, Ode, was 16 and carried himself with the specific arrogance of a boy who had recently grown taller than his father and hadn't yet learned humility about it. Bisi had a gap tooth the aunties said was for beauty, though she'd privately decided it was for personality, which she felt was the more accurate description. She was curious the way certain children are curious, not selectively, but completely, like a fire that doesn't choose which wood it burns. She read the label on every sachet that came into the kitchen. She once spent an entire afternoon interrogating her mother about why palm oil turned solid in the cold and liquid in the heat, until Mama Ode finally sent her outside with instructions not to return until she'd done something, anything, that didn't involve science. She loved the kitchen. She loved it the way people love something they haven't mastered yet but are already certain they will, with that particular unearned confidence of someone who has watched a thing done many times and concluded, from watching alone, that they understand it. Mama Ade was a good cook, not famous in the village good, but solid and dependable. Her jollof showed up at family gatherings and people quietly reached for seconds without making a scene about it. Her stew never surprised anyone, and in a household with a husband and 2 children, that kind of reliability was worth more than anybody admitted out loud. Bisi had watched her mother cook every day of her conscious life. She knew the rhythm, 3 counterclockwise stirs, then a slow drag along the bottom of the pot. She knew the sound oil made when it was hot enough for onions. She knew which burner ran too hot and which pot scorched the stew if you turned your back. What Bisi also had, and this is the part that changed everything, was her own ideas. The trouble with Bisi's ideas wasn't that they were bad. It was that they multiplied. One idea would breed 2 more, and those 2 would produce 5, until her head was crowded with culinary theories that carried no grandmother's blessing, no elder's approval, no cultural foundation whatsoever, just Bisi, sincere and unsupervised. She believed, with the total conviction only a 12-year-old can summon, that cooking was an art form being held hostage by tradition. That people were too cautious to ask what if. What if pepper soup had a little honey in it? What if tomato paste found its way into moi moi? What if Audrey and seasoning cubes could learn to get along? Most of these experiments happened quietly, a pinch here, a spoonful there, conducted when no one was watching. Some she was proud of. Some even the compound dog had approached with suspicion before backing away. But she had never been handed a full meal to cook on her own, not until the Friday evening she would later refer to, in a rare moment of accountability, as the incident. Fridays in Idiro carried their own particular warmth, a loosening in the air. School was done for the week. Fathers came home from work in better moods. Children played later than they should, and nobody chased them inside until the mosquitoes started their evening patrol. That afternoon, Mama Ade had gone to market, not the quick, purposeful trip of a woman who knows exactly what she needs, but the long social trip of a woman intent on catching up with at least 3 people and comparing tomato prices she already knew by heart. A trip that could last 2 hours or 4, depending entirely on who she ran into. Baba Ade sat in his usual chair, half watching a football replay he'd already seen, offering commentary to no one in particular. Ade had vanished into the back room, where his phone had become his primary address in recent months. And Bisi was in the kitchen. She hadn't been given permission to cook. She also hadn't been told not to. And in the particular legal system that operates inside a 12-year-old's mind, the absence of an explicit ban was close enough to a green light. She stood in the doorway a moment, looking at the ingredients her mother had laid out for dinner: tomatoes, peppers, onions, a piece of smoked fish wrapped in newspaper, a small bowl of crayfish, seasoning cubes, palm oil in its plastic bottle. Jollof rice and stew, Mama Ade's plan for the evening. Bisi looked at all of it and thought, I can do better. I need you to sit with this moment, because everything before it was set up, and everything after it was consequence, but this is the truth of the story. Bisi wasn't being reckless. She was being bold the way people are bold when they have information but not yet wisdom, when they've watched something 100 times but never once done it themselves. She believed in herself completely, the way children do before the world has had time to introduce doubt. And she began. She started reasonably enough. Rice measured generously, because she knew her family's appetite. Tomatoes blended. Onions softened in hot oil exactly the way she'd washed 1,000 times. Smoked fish cleaned and broken into the pot. Crayfish. Seasoning cubes. So far, so good, the kitchen even smelled the way it was supposed to. Then the ideas started arriving. She remembered, from somewhere, she couldn't say where, that some West African stews used a touch of tamarind for depth. She didn't have tamarind, but there was a small, dark, wrinkled ball sitting in a jar on the spice shelf, one her mother used occasionally but had never explained. Bisi assumed it was some kind of souring agent. She broke off a piece and dropped it in. She remembered a television chef adding a bay leaf to a tomato sauce for herbal undertones. She found dried bay leaves at the back of a drawer and added 2, then, reasoning that more must be more, a 3rd. The stew needed body, she decided, so in went a generous spoon of tomato paste. It needed smokiness, so she found a bottle of dark, salty liquid seasoning that promised on its label to enhance any dish, and poured some in. Then she read the label properly, use sparingly. She poured a little more anyway, because in her experience, use sparingly was advice given by people who were afraid of flavor. She added an extra seasoning cube, because the salt felt low. She added a pinch from a small, unlabeled container near the back of the shelf. She thought it was ground pepper, though its smell was sharper and stranger than pepper had any business being. She stirred, tasted, and decided the stew was ambitious. A stew that had been somewhere and come back with stories. She plated the rice, ladled the stew over generously, laid it out on the good Sunday plates, because a meal like this deserved the good plates, and went to call her family. Daddy, food is ready. Baba Ade looked up from the television with the particular confusion of a man not expecting to hear those words for another hour. He glanced at the clock, then toward the kitchen, then sniffed the air. Something smelled active. Cooking smells were familiar in this house, but this one had an edge to it, a rickety kind of assertiveness he couldn't quite name. Your mother's back. No. I cooked. A pause. You cooked? Yes, Daddy. Jollof and stew. It's ready. Baba Ade, a man who had been married long enough to understand that a child's enthusiasm required careful diplomacy, and who also happened to be hungry, unfolded himself from the chair. Ade was harder to win over. He appeared in the doorway, looked at the Sunday plates, looked at his sister. You actually cooked this? Yourself? From scratch? Yes. He picked up his fork, studied the plate, studied her. If this is bad, I'm telling Mommy. Sit down and eat, she said, with a dignity you honestly had to respect. They sat. The first forkful was quiet, not a bad quiet, a concentrating quiet. Baba Ode chewed slowly. Ode chewed. A ceiling fan turned overhead. Somewhere in another compound, someone called out to a child. The evening was settling in around them, unaware of what was coming. Bisi watched them with her hands folded, an artist waiting on the verdict. Baba Ed's face was hard to read. He chewed, swallowed, looked at his plate, took another bite. Ade had gone quiet in a different way now, the very specific, focused quiet of someone trying to identify exactly what they were tasting. Bisi, her father said carefully. What did you put in this too? Tomatoes, pepper, crayfish, smoked fish, palm oil, seasoning. What else? A small hesitation. Some extra things. For flavor. What extra things? Just things from the shelf. Spices. Baba Ode set his fork down. Not dramatically. Just down. It has a taste, he said, choosing his words the way a man chooses his footing on wet ground. Thank you, said Bisi. That wasn't, he stopped himself, picked the fork back up, because he was a man who did not waste food, and because he was hungry, and because surely, it would be fine. He finished his plate. Ade finished his too, though with noticeably less confidence by the end. Mama Ade came home 20 minutes later, still carrying market bags and mid-sentence about tomato prices, to find a plate waiting for her and her daughter standing nearby glowing with pride. She ate without a shred of suspicion. Why would she suspect her own kitchen? The first sign came from Baba Ade. He was back in his chair, football replay still murmuring, when his stomach made a sound he had never once heard his own body produce before, a low, thoughtful rumble, like an agreement quietly being reconsidered. He sat very still, having a private conversation with his own digestive system. The sound came again, closer this time, more insistent. He stood. He walked. Then, walking proving insufficient, he did something he hadn't done since his secondary school athletics days, he ran. Not quite a sprint. A motivated jog, the jog of a man who has calculated the distance to the toilet and concluded that urgency is now mandatory. The bathroom door closed. I won't describe what came from behind it. You're old enough. You know the sound of a body issuing a firm and immediate opinion about something it has recently eaten. Ade felt it next, not gradually, but as a sudden, commanding announcement. One moment he was lying on his bed scrolling his phone, the next, his body had made an executive decision about the following 10 minutes without consulting him. He bolted for the bathroom. The door was closed. He knocked. Daddy. A sound came back, not a word, more of a noise that communicated occupied, suffering, unavailable. He knocked again. Nothing helpful. He looked at the window. He looked at the back door. What happened after the back door opened is between him and the compound. Mama Ade was folding laundry when it found her, humming something low and content. The discomfort arrived first as a nuisance, then as an insistence, then as a decision her body had made without her consent. She grabbed her wrapper on reflex, modest even in crisis, and moved through the house at a speed that startled even her. Mommy. Bisi called from the sink, turning at the sound of running footsteps. Mama Ade did not answer. She was well past answering. She reached the bathroom door and pounded it with both palms. KO'd. Open this door. A muffled, unhelpful reply from inside. KO'd, I'm coming in. You can't come in. I'm coming in. What followed would be remembered for years afterward, with great affection, as the negotiation at the bathroom door. I'll leave it there. Bisi stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the sounds moving through the house, footsteps, voices, and yes, actual prayer, because Mama Ade, in her distress, had begun addressing God and a full roster of ancestors she hadn't called on by name since childhood, in rapid, urgent Yoruba. Bisi picked up the ladle and tasted the stew again. It still tasted fine to her. This is the part people always talk about afterward, because Bisi, standing alone in that kitchen, genuinely could not work out what had gone wrong. She was, in her own methodical way, a scientist about it. She tasted the stew again. She tasted the rice. She smelled the pot. Everything seemed fine to her. She briefly, very briefly, entertained the theory that her family had simply fallen ill by coincidence, entirely unrelated to the meal, at the exact same moment, right after eating the same food. She considered this seriously for about 4 seconds. Then, because even at 12 she had enough self-awareness not to fool herself for long, she let it go. She turned to the spice shelf. She picked up the unlabeled container and smelled it again, sharper than she remembered, almost medicinal. She tried to recall ever seeing her mother use it. She couldn't. She put it back down carefully, like it might go off. She picked up the bottle of liquid seasoning and found the fine print on the back label, add 2 to 3 drops to soups and stews. Do not exceed recommended amount. 2 to 3 drops. She had used at least 2 tablespoons. She read the ingredients list. Buried in the small print was a word she didn't recognize. She set the bottle down, picked up the small, dark, wrinkled ball she'd broken into the stew, and turned it over in her fingers, smelling it once more. She had absolutely no idea what it was. The sounds from the rest of the house continued around her. Oh, she said quietly, to no one. Mama Ade emerged from the bathroom 40 minutes later wearing an expression that was entirely her own, equal parts exhaustion, spiritual gratitude, and a fury still assembling itself into words. She found Bisi sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. Not hiding. Not pretending to be asleep. Just sitting there, in the manner of someone who has decided that whatever's coming will only get worse if she runs from it. This, you should know, was the thing about Bisi that nobody ever quite gave her credit for. For all her chaos, for all her wild confidence, she did not run from consequences. She sat down and waited for them. Mama Ade looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then at the pot. Then at the shelf. What, she said, very quietly, quiet being far more frightening than loud, did you put in that food? Bisi told her everything. The tamarind substitute that was not tamarind. The bay leaves, 3 of them. The tomato paste. The liquid seasoning, poured well past any recommended dose. The unlabeled container. Mama Ade walked to the shelf, picked up the container, and smelled it. Her face did something complicated. Bisi. Do you know what this is? No, Ma. This, said Mama Ade, holding it up like evidence in a trial, is something my mother used for treating fabric. It has never, in the entire history of this family, been food. I keep it on this shelf because the cupboard under the sink is full. It has been sitting there for 3 years. Silence. It's for fabric. For fabric. It is not edible. It is the opposite of edible. Baba Ade came in from the bathroom eventually, wearing the expression of a man trying very hard to be angry while his body was still too depleted from the last hour to properly supply the anger. Underneath it, if you looked closely, something was already trying to find the situation funny. Not yet. The funny needed time. He sat down. Ade came in from outside and sat too, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. His pride had sustained injuries it was still nursing. The four of them sat at the table while the ordinary village evening carried on outside, a radio somewhere, children still laughing across the road, the night insects tuning up, entirely unaware that a family had just been leveled by one girl's seasoning choices. Mama Ade spoke first. Bisi. You want to cook? I know you want to cook, I've watched you watching me for years. Yes, Ma. That's not wrong. Loving the kitchen is not wrong. Yes, Ma. But love without sense is how a family ends up exactly where we just were. She paused. Do you understand me? I thought if I added things, it would be better. Adding things only makes something better if you understand what you're adding, and why. Mama Ade leaned forward. When I cook, I'm not just throwing things into a pot. Every ingredient I choose, I know what it does. I know how it behaves next to other things. I know what too much looks like, and what too little tastes like. That knowledge, she tapped the table, took me years. Not from watching. From doing, properly, step by step. Baba Ade, who had been quiet, finally spoke. And from asking. Mama Ade looked at him. You should have asked, he said to Bisi, not unkindly. You had questions. You had ideas. The place for ideas is conversation, not experimentation on people's stomachs. Ade made a sound. Not quite a word. Firm agreement, from a boy in no position to elaborate further on the subject of stomach experiments. I want to stay in this moment, because I think this is where the story actually lives, not in the bathroom chaos, funny as it was, but right here, at this table, in this conversation. Bisi could have gotten defensive. She'd meant well, after all, and meaning well feels, from the inside, like it should count for something. She could have folded into silence and shame, the kind that doesn't teach anything, just wounds. She could have laughed it off too fast, using humor to dodge the lesson entirely. She did none of that. She sat, and she listened, and you could watch on her face, that gap-toothed face, freshly humbled, that she was actually taking it in. Not performing contrition. Receiving it. That is a harder thing than it sounds, for an adult, let alone a 12-year-old with strong opinions. Mommy, she said eventually. Can you teach me properly? Mama Ade studied her for a long moment. From the beginning. Not your version. My version. Slow, step by step. Yes, Ma. Even the boring parts. Washing. Cutting. Learning to heat oil before you touch anything exciting. Yes, Ma. Another long look. Then go bring me that seasoning bottle. The one you used? Bisi brought it. Mama Ade held it up. 2 to 3 drops. This is a flavor enhancer, a small amount deepens a dish. A large amount becomes the dish, and that is not the same thing. More does not mean better. More just means more. She set it down. That is the first lesson. The second lesson, she continued, is that a kitchen is not a laboratory. Ideas are fine, ideas are good. But an idea for food is a suggestion to be tested carefully. It is not a theory to be proven on your father's digestive system. From his chair, Baba Ade said, thank you, with real feeling. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in that kitchen. Mama Ade began teaching her daughter the way she herself had been taught, slowly, with purpose, with explanation. Not just what to do, but why. Why you heat the oil before the onions go in. What the sound of properly heated oil tells you. Why you taste as you go, not just at the end. Why some spices bloom in fat and others need water. Why some things want a long, slow simmer, and others want to be rushed off the heat entirely. Bisi learned that cooking wasn't one skill but many, stacked on top of each other, timing, chemistry, instinct, patience. She learned that patience wasn't the absence of enthusiasm but the channeling of it. that the most exciting move a cook could make was often the slowest one. She learned to ask before she added. She learned that asking wasn't weakness, it was intelligence. That her grandmother's knowledge, passed down through her mother, was a kind of wealth no amount of solo experimenting could replicate overnight. Her ideas didn't disappear. They sharpened. Now she'd say, "Mommy, what if we tried?" And her mother would explain why it might work, or why it wouldn't, or, sometimes, "Let's try a small amount and see." Those small, supervised experiments produced things that surprised them both, a pairing nobody had tried before that turned out to sing, a timing adjustment that made a familiar dish bloom in a new direction. Discoveries made slowly, with permission, with understanding. Not the kind that sent anyone running. Ade recovered his dignity within a week, helped along by the fact that nobody outside the house knew what had happened. That, it turned out, was only temporary. Mama Ade, a woman who loved her friends and loved a good story even more, told the whole thing at a neighbor's naming ceremony 3 months later, complete with sound effects, a full reenactment of Baba Aid's motivated jog, and a dramatic retelling of her own urgent prayers. The guest howled. The story crossed Idro in under 2 days. Ade didn't speak to his mother for 4 days straight. Baba Ade, for his part, had already found the humor by then, the way a body eventually forgives an incident once enough time has passed. He also quietly moved the unlabeled fabric treatment container to a shelf nowhere near the food. Bisi became briefly, madly famous around the village, not for anything admirable, exactly, but for something people remembered and smiled about. The food had ambition, people said. No sense, but plenty of ambition. She minded it less than you'd expect, because by then she was genuinely learning. Not watching from the doorway anymore, hands in the pot, nose close to the steam, her mother beside her explaining things nobody had ever explained before. The first time she made jollof and stew entirely on her own, properly, in full knowledge of what she was doing and why, it came out right. She tasted it and felt something different from that first chaotic night, not just the satisfaction of something that tasted good, but the satisfaction of knowing why it was good. Of tracing every choice back to understanding. That is a quieter kind of pride. Steadier, too. She brought a bowl to her father. He took a spoonful, chewed slowly, looked at his daughter. "This is good, Bisi." A pause. Not bad. Not you didn't poison us good. Just good. Simple. Direct. Real. She went back to the stove, and the feeling that settled in her chest was one she'd carry a long way, the feeling of having earned a small, honest thing. Idro had a short memory for most things, and the story of Bisi's cooking eventually settled into the background noise of village life, one small drama among many. But in the house where it happened, it left a mark, the kind that doesn't hurt, that you find yourself touching sometimes, thinking, that was when something changed. There's a saying, in one form or another, in many languages across this continent, success doesn't begin with speed. It begins with steadiness, with the willingness to carry the weight of learning before you claim the rewards of mastery. Bisi didn't know that saying at 12. But she was already living her way toward it. The boldness never left her. The confidence, the appetite for what if, none of it needed to go anywhere. It was good in her. It was the very thing that would one day make her remarkable, if she learned to carry it with the right kind of patience. What that kitchen taught her, over those long weeks of supervised learning, was that confidence and humility were never opposite. That you could believe in yourself completely and still be a student. That knowing what you don't know isn't the end of ambition, it's the beginning of real skill. So if there's something you love, cooking, building, making, teaching, and you catch yourself reaching for the unlabeled container, full of confidence and certainty that more is more, slow down. Ask the question. Find the person who learned before you did, and sit with them. Not because your ideas are wrong, but because the right ideas, properly learned, properly tested, properly understood, are the only ones that ever make it to the table. Those are the ones that last. Content. Let me tell you something about food. Not the kind of food you eat to fill your belly. Anybody can make that. I mean the kind of food that has a conversation with your soul before it even reaches your mouth. The kind where the smell alone makes you pull a chair before you've been invited. The kind tea. Pasted. The girl who cooked with ambition. Let me tell you something about food. Not the kind you eat just to fill your belly, anybody can make that. I mean the kind that talks to your soul before it ever reaches your mouth. The kind where the smell alone pulls a chair out for you before you've been invited. Pasted.